Let me introduce myself. My name is Mark Mamagonian. I'm the Director of Academic Affairs here at the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NASAR. Oh, you can hear me now. So glad to have you with us here tonight in person and out there online. It's a significant evening for us on several scores, and I would like to try to be brief in explaining what I mean. So let me try. First, it's significant that we have the opportunity to welcome to NASAR for the very first time a very distinguished scholar, Professor Michael Basler, and to welcome back to NASAR a no less distinguished but more familiar friend, Professor Taner Akçam. It certainly is as much a pleasure to welcome new people as it is to welcome old ones back. The project they are leading and about which we will hear tonight, UCLA's Armenian Genocide Looted Art Research Project, is an important one and is something that NASAR has been proud to be a part of since its inception. This is the third of 3 Northeast U.S. presentations over the past several days that Taner and Michael have given, and I want to thank them and all of the co-sponsoring organizations of this mini tour. The Armenian Genocide Research Program at the UCLA Promise Armenian Institute, the Middle East and Middle Eastern American Center at the City University of New York Graduate Center, the New York City Times Square Armenian Genocide Committee, St. Leon Armenian Church, and the NASAR Kalusgal-Benkian Lecture Series on Contemporary Armenian Issues. The second reason why tonight is special is that it is the first Reverend Vartan Hartunian annual lecture at NASAR, which has been established through the generosity of the Hartunian family. And I want to thank them, and I want to ask the members of the family here present, if you're able to please stand, be recognized, and be thanked. Thank you so much. I also want, before I go further, to recognize a young woman who is here tonight, Natalie Tenekedjian of Watertown High School, who was recently selected as the recipient of the Tough Choices in History Book Award winner and Tough Choices in History Reverend Vartan Hartunian Scholarship winner. Congratulations, Natalie. It's wonderful chance to have you here with us on this occasion. I want to talk a little bit about Reverend Vartan Hartunian. Although I remember him telling me that he preferred to be called Pastor Vartan, and consequently, that's what I'm going to call him in my remarks. He was the son of Abraham and Shushan Hartunian. He was born on February 11th, 1915 in Marash, and a survivor of the Armenian Genocide, escaping with his family in 1922 during the burning of Smyrna, and reaching America, with the family settling in Philadelphia. He was the valedictorian of the 1934 class at West Philadelphia High School and graduated from Swarthmore College. He became a technical writer and then turned to the ministry, attending Union Theological Seminary. He was the minister at the First Armenian Church in Belmont, our across-the-street neighbor, from 1959 until his retirement in 1998. Pastor Vartan was one of the founders of the Armenian Museum of America. The basement of his church was the museum's first home, as some of you will remember. And it is no coincidence that in 1989, NASAR moved from its Cambridge location to this place across the street from First Armenian Church, for it was Pastor Vartan who first tipped our founding chairman, Manuk Young, to the availability of this building. Pastor Vartan translated his father's memoir, Neither to Laugh Nor to Weep, from the original Armenian into English. There is a story to be told in depth on another occasion, but which I would like to mention in passing here. Neither to Laugh Nor to Weep was submitted for publication in the 1960s to Harvard University Press and was accepted, conditional on the provision of a suitable and satisfactory introduction. In Nasser's files, we have copies of some of the correspondence that Pastor Vartan shared with Manuk Young, including one letter from a respected scholar of the Ottoman Empire who stated that, quote, "I had occasion to talk informally with a friend who has been on the Turkish desk in the State Department. He was certain that a book on Armenian atrocities would have unfavorable results for U.S.-Turkish relations." Another letter expressed the scholar's view that, quote, "I'm afraid that the publication of this work by the leading American university may be viewed as a political act by the Turkish side." And so Neither to Laugh Nor to Weep was not published by Harvard University Press, but rather by the Beacon Press in 1968, and then in subsequent editions by Nasser's Armenian Heritage Press, and has become a classic and has been translated into multiple languages. Pastor Vartan was a lecturer and spokesperson who worked to expose the denial of the Armenian genocide. He was a dedicated Nasser member and supporter and participant in numerous public programs that we organized for more than 40 years. And this annual lecture continues his legacy of integrity and dedication to truth in history. Any crime that is forgotten or forgiven is a crime that has been sanctioned and blessed, Pastor Vartan once said. The surviving victims must proclaim the truth. I haven't scrolled through my pictures here. This was in the 1980s, I think, at the publication of the second edition of Neither to Laugh Nor to Weep. Definitely getting very serious there with the late Gregory Adamian, with Manuk, and marrying a lovely young couple in 2001. That's me. His whole career was really building to that moment. Thus, when thinking about when to hold the first lecture in his honor, the simultaneously developing plans to have Taner Akçam and Michael Besler come to Nasser seemed like a propitious development. The denial and silence that has for so many years cast shadows over discussion and exploration of all issues relating to the Armenian genocide, including the issues that we will hear about tonight, has shaped this project that they are leading and about which we will now hear. So let me introduce our speakers. Yes. Taner Akçam is the inaugural director of the Armenian Genocide Research Program of the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA. His most recent publication is The Great Crime by Aram Andonian, Talat Pasha's Orders on the Armenian Genocide and Naim Bey's Testimony, 2026, just arrived in our bookstore. He is also the author of such key books as A Shameful Act, The Armenian Genocide and the Question of Turkish Responsibility, The Young Turks' Crime Against Humanity, The Armenian Genocide and Ethnic Cleansing in the Ottoman Empire, and Killing Orders, Talat Pasha's Telegrams and the Armenian Genocide. His forthcoming book, Empire of Violence, A New History of the Armenian Genocide, will be published by Princeton University Press early next year. Michael Besler is professor of law and the 1939 law scholar in Holocaust and Human Rights Studies at Chapman University. His books include Holocaust Justice, The Battle for Restitution in America's Courts, Holocaust, Genocide and the Law, A Quest for Justice in a Post-Holocaust World, and Searching for Justice After the Holocaust, Fulfilling the Terrorism Declaration and Immovable Property Restitution. Do you sense a theme there? He is one of the leading experts on the use of American and European courts to redress genocide and other historical wrongs. We are fortunate to have two of the leading authorities in their fields with us tonight, so please welcome them. Starting with Taner. We will adjust the microphone accordingly.
Thank you, Mike. So, thank you, Mark. Thank you for these nice introductions. Stay away from me because everyone will understand how short I am. So
Can't be helped.
thank you. Thank you so much. So really, Nasser is my home. So it's a great pleasure to be here at Nasser. And I have to also admit there is something about this place, an atmosphere, an aura that I always find deeply moving. I remember when I came to United States, this place was one of the first places where I lectured, and maybe there were some translations also at that time. So my role is very limited today, actually. I will introduce our Armenian Genocide Looted Art project. But before I turn to that, let me say a few words about my long-standing friendship with Michael Beisler, which goes back some 25 years ago. We first met in 2002 thanks to our late mutual friend Stefan Feinstein in Minnesota. At that time, I was in Minnesota, and Michael was in Los Angeles. We ended up teaching a course together remotely, long before the remote teaching became fashionable. Since then, our paths have crossed many times, both intellectually and personally. When I was at Clark University, I organized a conference in 2012 on reparations and restitution, looking comparatively at the Holocaust, Native Americans, and the Armenian genocide. Michael was one of the leading voices of that meeting. As many of you will recall, around that time, there were nearly, maybe more than 10 cases in California related to Armenian genocide reparations, spearheaded by the late Vartkes Yegian. Michael played a central, a very crucial role in those court cases, in those litigations. And our collaboration continued closely during those years also. Occasionally, though, they asked me a couple of questions when I was here at Clark. Then came the recognition in 2019 and 2021, an important turning point, the recognition of Armenian genocide by Senate and by the president. But I found myself a little bit weird and asking, we achieved recognition, but did we achieve justice? And if not, so what? What is the purpose of this recognition? It was around this time in 2020, that time, 2022, when I came to UCLA as director of the Armenian Genocide Research Program, that I reconnected with Michael. And these were precisely the questions we began to discuss together. As you all know, for decades, genocide recognition became almost like the skin color of the Armenian diaspora. Its definite defining identity, its beginning and its end, especially here in North America. We all remember the Aprils, the intense anticipation, and the recurring anxiety over whether the American president would use the word genocide. And each time, the outcome brought disappointment. You remember those days? Today, however, the situation has clearly changed. Few people are still asking whether an American president, someone like Trump, for example, will use the term genocide or not. I mean, I'm not interested much in that. Because the recognition of 2019 and 2021 effectively closed that chapter, at least here in United States. But they left one of the central questions open: justice. There was no justice. It's unresolved. And without justice, actually recognition is meaningless. This leaves us with a fundamental question. If United States recognition has not produced any meaningful step towards justice, what should come next? At least here in American context. Of course, as long as Turkey continues to deny the genocide, recognition will remain an issue. And without Turkey's acknowledgement, the question of justice cannot be fully resolved. Yet, there is also political reality that is difficult to ignore in these days. The expectation that external pressure will compel Turkey to recognize 1915 has little practical basis, almost nothing. Indeed, recent development suggests that the wind's actually blowing from just the opposite side. The Armenian government, caught between Azerbaijan and Turkey, appears out of necessity inclined to push the historical question into the background. They try as much as possible not to talk on these topics in order not to jeopardize their peace talk with Azerbaijan and Turkey. So wind is blowing really totally from other direction. Under this condition, continuing to rely on the old paradigm, waiting for major powers, United States, Europe, and so on, to pressure Turkey starts to look like an illusion. For this reason, I see the long-standing focus on recognition as a kind of a trap. This was my idea. It is still that I believe. Recognition is a trap for us. One that has shaped diaspora activism for decades, but now limits our ability to see new possibilities. This is our project all about. What I would like to suggest instead of recognition is more practical approach. Don't get me wrong. I mean, recognition will be, of course, there as an ultimate goal, but we should be very pragmatic and to move beyond this narrow framework and open up new avenues that we have overlooked precisely because we have been so focused on recognition. We live here in the United States. The question then is this for all of us. Is in the post-recognition era, can we develop another path, another strategy by making use of opportunities available here in the United States? In other words, does the American political and legal system offer us some avenues to move forward towards justice? What should we do after recognition? These were the questions, and precisely these were the issues Michael and I asked ourselves and had long conversations and debates and discussions. And we decided to organize the first conference, 2023. The question was simple. Under this condition, how can justice be attained? This was the purpose. To this, I gave one clear answer. It's a kind of a negative answer. The mindset, I believed, the mental framework that shaped the recognition movement. So I'm talking recognition as a movement, but the mindset, the mental framework that shaped the recognition movement cannot give us an answer. This is my conclusion. A perspective narrowly focused on states, American state, Turkish state, European states, focused on states and confined to pressuring them to act has reached its limits. We need to move beyond state-centered thinking. What we need is a new intellectual framework. And once we free ourselves from the state-bound mode of thinking and action, we begin to see that it is possible to take concrete steps towards justice. But this requires asking new questions and seeking new answers. It is this search for justice through new ways of thinking and acting that can guide us toward tangible outcomes. The line of thinking led me to simple conclusion, and it was, of course, Michael and I, our both conclusion was that what we need to do in the United States is to lay the foundation for a reparation movement. In other words, to move beyond waiting for recognition by one state or another, and instead take the issue into our own hands by pursuing concrete, it might be small, but concrete steps towards reparation. In doing so, we can begin to overcome the current deadlock. But what does reparation mean? In its simple sense, it means to rectify and compensate, however partially, for what was destroyed or erased in the name of justice, while recognizing that what was lost can never be fully restored. We know all these. The return of confiscated or stolen properties, especially artworks, is an important part of this process. And we must begin somewhere. In our discussion, Michael and I came to the conclusion that one such starting point is the Armenian Genocide Looted Art Project. We know that looted artifacts constitute only a very small part of the broader framework of reparation. Everybody knows this. It's not a complicated thing. But they provide a concrete and powerful entry point. They are powerful symbols and tangible evidence of loss, the loss of Armenian civilization. So we can really start from that point. Their return, even small, represent a deeply meaningful, symbolic step towards recovering what has been taken, even it can never be fully restored, and at the same time, they are small lights guiding us along the long and difficult road towards justice. If I may use a metaphor from soccer plays, this is what we call feint. It sidestepped the opponent, rendering their position, whether they recognize or deny, largely irrelevant. I don't care whether they recognize the Armenian genocide or not. I have to do what I have to do. This is really fight for justice. There are something to do there. This is like the strategy that we thought really useful. If reparation are to move to the center of our agenda, then we must ask another new fundamental question. What was the Holocaust restitution movement look like? And how might it serve as a model for Armenians? To answer this, we need to look at its main features. What I would call Holocaust, some measure of justice movement, unfolded in three major phases. And it's really eye-opening process if you look. And I read all these that I'm going to tell you from Michael's writings. He wrote extensively on Holocaust restitution movement. And here, some ideas that I took from his book. Three phases he spoke about Holocaust restitution movement. The first phase began immediately after 1945. The Allied powers, following their victory, sought to recover and return Nazi-looted assets, including Jewish property. They enacted laws, seized these assets, and attempted to restore them to surviving owners. These efforts were significant, but only partially successful. Many of you here may not know that exactly something similar also occurred in the Armenian genocide. After the armistice of 1918, the Ottoman government issued decrees allowing surviving Armenians to return and reclaim their properties. In January 1920, a law regulated this process, later incorporated into Article 144 of the Treaty of Sevres. But with the victory of Turkish nationalists, the entire process collapsed. This was the first phase. The second phase of Holocaust restitution began with negotiated settlements. In 1952, West Germany and Israel signed the Luxembourg Agreement, and in preparation, 23 Jewish organizations had come together in 1951 to form the Claim Conference. That institution and later World Jewish Organization, Jewish Restitution Organization, after the fall of Soviet Union, worked systematically to identify, locate, and return confiscated property and artwork across Europe. Here lies the missing link in Armenian case. Turkey is far from of settlement with Armenian or diaspora organizations regarding the damages inflicted by the genocide. Armenians themselves also far from forming a unified political movement and lack the necessary institutional structure. We don't have such a vision here, United States. The third phase of Holocaust restitution began in the 1990s and focused on the litigation in United States courts. Numerous lawsuits were filed against European governments and corporations. Some failed, but many succeeded, and Michael himself was at the forefront of this process. This third phase is especially important for two reasons. First, because the United States was and remains the world's leading power, and its legal system possesses distinctive features that made such lawsuits possible. What are these unique aspects, and why are they so crucial? Michael will address these questions in his talk. One answer, therefore, was clear for us when we discussed these. The Holocaust restitution movement can serve as a blueprint for Armenians. It was this context that we launched the Armenian Genocide Looted Art Research Project and organized two different conferences. From the outside, we conceived of it as part of a broader Armenian genocide restitution movement. We have assembled a remarkable strong team. Alongside the institutions such as Nasser, Mark Mamigonian is the leading element in the committee that we established, Ararat Eskijian Museum, the Fresno State Armenian Studies Program, and the Armenian Film Foundation. We are working with leading scholars in the field, including Michael Beisler, Jonathan Petropoulos, one of the foremost important historians of Holocaust looted art, Lauren Filder from the University of Texas School of Law, Levon Chokassian, chair of the History and Theory of Armenian Art at Yerevan State University, and Christina Maranchi of Harvard University. A very strong team. Our first task was, of course, to compile a list of Armenian objects held in American museums. To our surprise, we discovered that this had never been done before. There was no list of the Armenian art objects in American museums. We completed this work by hiring around 15 graduate students, law students, art historians, non-Armenians, and we discovered really a developed inventory, and in our hand, we can now begin to trace the trajectories of specific objects. And here is the encouraging news for all of you. Our research has already uncovered promising leads. And we hope soon to share concrete findings that will attract broader public attention. Stay tuned. Wait our announcements. Within this framework of this project, we also set ourselves some modest but important goals. We frame them with a simple question. If the United States has recognized the Armenian genocide, why should it not take the step similar to those taken in the Holocaust case? At the very least, it is reasonable to expect comparable initiatives. Our guiding principle is simple. Whatever has been done for the Holocaust should also be done for the Armenian genocide. And in fact, not only for Armenians, for all cases of mass violences, of course. For example, why not establish a set of principles just as the 1998 Washington Principles laid the foundation for Holocaust art restitution? We could imagine, for example, Los Angeles or Boston or California principle for Armenian genocide looted art. Framework for identifying, cataloging, and ultimately pursuing the restitution of Armenian cultural property. Even more importantly, why not adopt legislation similar to the enacted in the Holocaust context? The 1998 Holocaust Victims Redress Act, followed by the measures such as the 2016 Holocaust Expropriated Art Recovery Act, created legal foundation for claims. You know what you should know? In contrast, there is no legally binding framework for Armenian genocide claims. The recognition in Congress, presidential recognition, only symbolic. It has no legal binding power. But in Holocaust case, we have several of them. So why should we not develop the same legal form? This is our idea. And Michael will explain in more detail the importance of the Washington Principle and these legal mechanisms. But for any of these to happen, Armenians, together with all those who see the pursuit of justice as a fundamental human right, must act. Without a strong political movement and the necessary institutional structure, none of these goals can be achieved. There is still no Armenian Claim Commission. So this means an organization of Armenians that comes together and develop a roadmap for the reparation and restitution. And this is maybe the most important task before us. At this point, I would like to add a constructive observation regarding the activism, Armenian activism in the United States. Given the legal and political leverages available, especially in the states like California, it is both possible and necessary to pursue binding legal initiatives similar to 2016 HERE Act. The fact that such efforts have not been systematically placed on the agenda by those engaged in long-standing lobbying activities in Washington represent a significant gap. This should be understood not as criticism for its own sake, but as a constructive call to rethink priorities and strategies. This is our call to Armenian activist groups and organizations. Take these 2016 Holocaust Recovery Act similar legal binding laws in American Congress. It is easy to do, but you have to put these on the agenda. The pursuit of justice will not be easy and will be full of obstacles, just as the recognition campaign was. Yet, recognition was achieved after decades of struggle. And with this in mind, it is now my great pleasure to turn to Michael, who will explain why and how the Holocaust, some measure of justice movement, can serve as a model for us and what concrete steps lie ahead for the Armenian Genocide Looted Art Project. Michael, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm very happy to be here. Oh yeah. I'm so moved by your remarks that thank you so much, dear friend. This is our 3-state tour. We've been in New York and New Jersey, and now we're in Massachusetts doing this. It's been such a pleasure. I have learned so much hearing you, listening to you. I want to go ahead and thank Nasser. I want to thank Mark, all the other organizations that made it possible for us to go ahead and to talk about the subject. As you can tell from what Tanner had talked about, we are very passionate about this. And I think we're doing something new and something that I think will bring also a measure of justice, reparation, restitution in the area of Armenian genocide. Every mass atrocity, every genocide has not only mass murder, but also mass plunder. And the same thing that occurred with the Holocaust also happened with the Armenian genocide. And this is something I am learning all along. I am a law professor. I teach at Chapman University. And in 2000, I created a new course called Holocaust and the Law. There was a reason for me to teach that. Both my parents, young, had escaped Jews, Nazi Germany. And so the Holocaust was something just like for you, like the air that we breathe, right? It's there all the time. We feel it. And I have to tell you that when I teach this course, and we have the largest population of Armenians in California, I have to report to you that the young generation, when they come and speak to me on this, and they say the word genocide, I can feel the energy that comes from them. This is the young people. They are carrying that, and they're very, very passionate about it. So it's very, very something that we can see, is so similar between these two mass atrocities. I began looking at this after I started teaching the course, and the very first time after I finished that at Chapman, I thought, no, it's not going to be Holocaust in the law. It should be Holocaust genocide in the law, because I don't want to just talk about, the Holocaust. I think there's other mass atrocities. And for that one, I wanted to include the Armenian genocide. It's something that I had learned when I was a undergraduate at UCLA. I had very fine professors who taught me about this. I remember going down Bruin Walk and seeing for the first time as a 19-year-old these commemorations of what I never knew, like what happened to them, just like Raphael Lemkin, the person who coined the term genocide, did not know until he learned later on. So I went through such an understanding. And in 2006, I actually was a visiting professor at Pepperdine University School of Law, and I taught that course. I do remember the Armenian students taking that course. And I also want to point out that Jennifer Allison, who's the international law librarian at Harvard Law School, was one of my students. Okay, and she's here with her husband. So what a great surprise. Yeah. What better thing to see is your law student so many years later becoming so successful and still working on this. So this is now going back to the 1990s, and it begins with the Clinton administration. And during the Clinton years, at the end of 1990s, there was a very strange phenomenon that occurred. lawsuits began to be filed in American courts dealing with the plunder of Jewish property during the Holocaust in Europe. Now, the Holocaust didn't occur in the United States, it occurred in Europe. The plunder was in Europe, but it was here, the litigation, there was the loud knock on the door that made the defendants, whether they were Swiss banks or European insurance companies or German companies who used Jews for experiments or used them as slave labor, to go ahead and pay attention to that. And for that reason, because there was so much attention, President Clinton appointed someone to be a special representative, okay, to the president on the issue of Holocaust restitution. So here I want to introduce you to a hero, the person that has made all of this possible. His name is Stuart Eisenstadt, and Ambassador Eisenstadt began looking at this, began negotiations between the US government and the various public and private institutions throughout the world, in the United States, but also the offices in the United States, but all came from Europe, that participated in the thievery between 1933 and 1945 of Jewish property. And as a result of this, he started focusing on one aspect of that, and that is Nazi looted art. So just like Connor, Professor Akram gave you some abbreviations, I want to introduce you as a professor, two that I want you to take away. One is NLA, which is Nazi looted art, and the second is a term that we ourselves have invented. It's AGLA, Armenian Genocide Looted Art. And the model that we saw of AGLA restitution comes directly from NLA restitution, and it goes back to Ambassador Eisenstadt. So historians and international organizations estimate that the Nazis stole approximately 1/5, 20% of all artwork in Europe during the Third Reich. There's about an estimate of 650,000 individual art pieces. If you take all of the art that was at all the museums in the United States in 1939, it would still be less than the amount of art that the Nazis had stolen. Not just from Jews, but also from museums, from collections. And out of the 650,000, to this day, about 100,000, 150,000, okay, is still, we don't know where it is. And the litigation, restitution, other measures to try to restitute that art still is going on today. And I will show you this towards the end of the presentation. And so for this, for Nazi looted art, as Professor Akram mentioned, it begins in 1945. So you have here, this is all photos of US soldiers. They're now in a salt mine. Do you see this? And they see in the salt mine, they recover this artwork, right? Why did they put them in salt mine? One is Germany's being bombed, so it's safe over there. Second, because it's the perfect humidity to make sure that it's there. And so you see a lot of this art is discovered in mines. It also is discovered in, you see here, in palaces with soldiers coming in, right? And you also have, people, soldiers also just coming and seeing this. Do you see this? And so the US Army actually created a team called the Monuments Men, whose job was to go ahead and restore that art. You might have seen the film with George Clooney, made a number of years ago, that told that particular story. And here, Ambassador Eisenstadt recognized how much of this still has to be done. And so what he did is in 1998, he ended up winning and putting together a conference to deal with this. But before doing so, he was working for the Clinton administration, and he ended up getting settlements with various private corporations, and the German government, other institutions, in order to have a measure of recovery. This was, something that was unbelievable because we never thought it would happen so many years after the Holocaust. You can see he wrote a book in 2003 where he's now back in, no longer in government, called Imperfect Justice. And you see he has here, and you look at it, it says looted assets, slave labor, and the unfinished business of World War II. And you see here, you have a Judaica piece. You could have a similar book with something that goes to the Armenian genocide. You see that? It's a Jewish menorah that shows you that it represents exactly what we're talking about. And so during that year, I also, as a scholar in the ivory tower, began looking at this. And I wrote a book about it called Holocaust Justice. And I talked about the litigation against the Swiss banks, against the European insurance companies, against Austrian companies, against French banks. And I decided on the cover, I wanted to put Nazi looted art. Do you see that? And it turned out to be the longest chapter in the book. I'm not an art historian. That was not my background. But it was so fascinating. I just began reading and looking and more at it. And I ended up do a follow-up book, Holocaust Restitution, where I invited the major players, including Ambassador Eisenstadt, to go ahead and to write an essay, some of the claimants, and even some of the attorneys on both the prosecution side and the defense side to provide the story, right, as to what happened with this Holocaust restitution movement. Now, at that time, Ambassador Eisenstadt, and I'm in the ivory tower, does something that now is with us to this very day. He ends up convening a conference of 22 nations in Washington, D.C., in order to deal with one specific issue of Holocaust restitution, and that is Nazi looted art, what I had pointed out to you. And the mission of the Washington Principles, and I'll talk more about it in a moment, was to find and identify Nazi looted art, to build a central registry of Nazi looted art. And you can see that Professor Aksham and I are trying to do that a little bit with the Armenian genocide looted art. We have our own mini registry. Encourage pre-war heirs of the art to come forward and make a claim, and search for a fair and just solutions to Nazi looted art restitution. The principles came out. Let me show you some of the language. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I went in and highlighted. First of all, this is not a treaty between various nations. These are non-binding principles by which countries that have Nazi art will apply, by which individual museums, whether it's MoMA here, in New York, or in museum here in Boston or anywhere else, will, if they have, art that was stolen during World War II and it's Nazi looted art, they agree that the art that has been confiscated by the Nazis should be identified, and one of the ways to identify them is open the archives to see what's there, because we just don't know where this missing art is. Every effort should be made, you can see number 5, to publicize art that is found to have been confiscated by the Nazis. And this has been done. You see stories almost every month about a new claim of some piece that someone ended up having, whether it's a museum or a private owner, that turned out to be art that was stolen, during the Nazi era in Europe. And it finds itself all over the world. Other things that are part of those Washington Principles: to achieve a fair and just resolution, or fair and just solution. You can see that's mentioned in both Principle 8 and Principle 9. And then we also know that litigation is something that is the loud knock on the door, but it also is very time-consuming and very expensive. So I want to make clear that looking for Armenian genocide looting art, we are not trying to create more lawsuits. That's not what we want to do. Litigation is the last option. We want a recognition, restitution, and whatever else would achieve a fair, a just and fair solution to AGLA, just like we're trying to achieve a just and fair solution for NLA. Now, the principles have been in place now for more than 25 years. And in 2024, Ambassador Eisenstadt convened another conference, and they said, okay, let's update the Washington principles, and we're going to now call them best practices. What have we learned for the last 25 years? So in recognition of the 25th anniversary, it's still going to be legally non-binding, but morally important best practices. It now defines in best practice B what is Nazi confiscated, what is Nazi looted art. We do the same thing with AGLA, and I'll show you this in a moment. And that the sale of art and cultural property by persecuted person during the Holocaust era between 1933 and 1945 can be considered equivalent to an involuntary transfer of property. Do you see that? Because some of that property is transferred by duress. You know, Jewish person, you want to leave? You have this art collection? Fine, you leave, the art collection stays with us. Or you sell it for very, very small price, right? And again, the principle, the goal is to have a primary goal of just and fair solution is restitution. Do you see that? That's the end for NLA. That's what we're trying to achieve with AGLA. All right? Restitution should be to all lawful beneficiaries and heirs in accordance with the country's usual inheritance law. So this is where law comes in. And I'm going to drop down, countries are encouraged to create independent expert bodies in order to go through the archives and to identify the art that's there that's Nazi looted and to decide what to do with it. And I mentioned here, and mentioned in the past practices, some countries like Austria, France, Germany, Netherlands, United Kingdom have done that, and they're still going on. Now, what is important about this, and this is with principle N, recognize urgent need to do so because of time. There's another principle that Professor Akçam mentioned, which I think is critical to both restitution of Nazi looted art and Armenian genocide looted art. We are not just talking about any object. It's not just an object. It represents the patrimony of the Armenian people. Just like Nazi looted art that was taken from the Jews represents the patrimony of the Jewish people. You saw the menorah that was on the cover of Ambassador Eisenstadt's book. And so you see here, I put this in red, the object should not be seen as collection items, but as part of the collective memory of the Jewish people. Do you see that? So this is the best practices for Holocaust looted art, and you see what our mission is. We're revealing to you how we're following this and what we want to do. So what happened during the 25 years? The results have actually been mixed. What has occurred is lawsuits have been filed, and very often the museum or the private owner says, yes, okay, that's something that was looted from a Jewish family, but that doesn't belong to that Jewish family anymore. It belongs to us. And one of the lessons we learned is that museums, galleries, private collectors are very reluctant to give back, to return the art that they have. And so if they recognize that it's looted, how do they keep it if there's a lawsuit against them? They use procedural devices, something that I remember teaching at Pepperdine, with Jennifer there. You say, well, we're never going to get to trial because you're filing the lawsuit too late, the statute of limitations. Or you knew about it all this time and you should have gotten it. Or, yes, you may have a claim, but the claim doesn't belong in the United States because the part is not here. It's another part of the world. Do you see that? So there's all these defenses, procedural defenses, that good lawyers, and I am saying good lawyers, and I teach this to my students, to use for a case not to go to trial in order to dismiss it without the claimants actually having their day in court. And so you can see, the bullet points as to what occurred. But with regard to that, there was one case that was really a major success. And this is the case involving Altman versus Austria. You might have heard of this case. There was a Hollywood film made about it. I will tell you some more about this. I show this to my students every single year. Pardon me? Yes. I will show you, okay? Yes. So Altman, okay, Maria Altman, was a Holocaust survivor, a young woman. You'll see her photos. In 1939, she and her husband escaped Austria. They were Austrian Jews, secular Jews, and they ended up fleeing to Los Angeles. But in doing so, they also knew that their aunt and uncle, the Bloch Bauers, were people that were major art collectors and major patrons of living artists during that time period, prior to World War II, in the interwar period. And they ended up being as patrons to a number of painters, including artists named Gustav Klimt. Okay? And Klimt was so important to them, and they were so important to him, that he ended up doing a portrait, okay, of the woman in gold. Do you see this? So this is the Adele Bloch-Bauer 1. And it's the only time that Gustav Klimt actually did two portraits of the same subject. So this is Bloch-Bauer 1, okay, and I will show you in a moment. You see there's Bloch-Bauer 2. And if you see here, there are the photographs, all right? So you can see what he's doing. And I can go more details on this, but what happened is that Adele Bloch-Bauer, she died in her 40s when she was not very old. Her husband, who was older than her, continued living. And when the Austrian Nazis took over, and what was the Anschluss in 1938, he fled. Okay, his wife is no longer alive. He fled, but the art stayed. All right? His niece and her husband also fled. All right? And when he flees, okay, he finally ends up in London, and he writes a will. They didn't have any children. So in the will, he says that all my possessions will go to my niece and nephews. And there's the niece, there's Maria Altman. So this is the painting. It's the woman in gold, painted in 1907 by Gustav Klimt, who lived until 1918. Do you see that? And there is this law in the United States called the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, by which a foreign country can be sued, or a public institution, including a public museum, can be sued in the United States if your lawsuit falls within a specific exception of this law called the FSIA. And so here's Maria Altman, her husband Fritz, arriving in Los Angeles in 1939. Right? Here's Maria many years later, and this is with a reproduction of this. And in the 1990s, she learned something shocking. She knew when she went to Austria that that's the painting of my aunt, Adele Bloch-Bauer 1, Adele Bloch-Bauer 2. But I know that they ended up donating those to the Austrian National Gallery before the Nazis ever came. Not true. Okay? An investigative journalist looked at the records, okay, of the Austrian National Gallery. It's like our Smithsonian Institution, and found a letter that transferred the legal title, right, of the art after Ferdinand fled, okay, to the Austrian National Gallery, and at the end, it was signed Heil Hitler. Okay? So she realizes there's something here, okay? This is looted art. So she ends up hiring a young attorney, Randy Schoenberg, who is the hero of the story, who also went to USC Law School, where I went. And Randy is working for a law firm. And Aunt Maria, she's not his real aunt, but he is the grandson of Arnold Schoenberg, the famous composer. And she says, can you help me? And he's just a few years out of law school. He goes to his law firm and they said, no, we don't do this. Okay. And we don't do it on a contingency basis. We don't have billboards there, no recovery, no fee. Okay. So what Randy does, and this is all in the movie, right? He leaves his job and he already has a family and children. And during that time, I'm writing my book. He's now working with another lawyer. They started a two-person law firm, doing anything that he could to survive, at the same time working on this. And Austria kept saying, no, absolutely not. Under Austrian law, this painting and these other paintings belong to us, okay, under Austrian law. So Randy makes a claim with the Austrian Claim Commission, and they also say no. So what do? You're an American. What do we do with Americans? We sue. So Randy files a lawsuit, Altman versus Austria. Do you see that? In Los Angeles federal court. And he finds out, as he looks through this, that there is this law, the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, okay, that provides an exception. Okay? And the exception provides lawsuits against a foreign country in which rights and property are taken in violation of international law. You see that? And they were taken, from the Black Powers because they were Jewish. You see that? It's clear violation of international law. And the property's held by a public entity in that particular country. And the Austrian Gallery is that public entity, like our Smithsonian is our public entity. You can see some of the other paintings that are there. And he ends up going to the trial court, and the trial judge ends up saying, yeah, I think you're right. Right? It does fall within the FSIA. This law was passed in 1976. Austria doesn't like that. They appeal. The Ninth Circuit says, yeah, I think the judge is right. Okay? Austria then says, we're going to go to the US Supreme Court, right? And we're going to say this law is not retroactive. It was passed in 1976. These pieces were taken before 1976. Therefore, the law should not apply. And the case goes to the United States Supreme Court. Randy argues the case, even though he's never argued a Supreme Court case, all right? He goes and argues the case, and he wins, all right? The majority of the justices say yes. When Congress passed this law, they wanted to apply to takings even before 1976. So now the case is going to be going to trial in Los Angeles. Do you see this? And so at that point, and I remember talking to the Austrian ambassador, I wrote a book and there was a chapter on this, I kept saying, no. This is not a restitution case. We have it properly. Now they kept saying, no, maybe we should have alternative dispute resolution, right? Let's go ahead and see if we can make an agreement. Let's do arbitration. But the arbitration is not going to be in the United States. It's going to be in Austria. It's going to be in front of Austrian arbitrators. It'll involve Austrian law. And if you saw the movie, okay, I'm sure the Reverend mentioned this, there was a scene where Randy Schoenberg, played by Ryan Reynolds, goes to Helen Mirren, who plays, okay, Maria Altman, and says, please let me do this, all right? I speak German, I'm going to represent you. If we don't, they will continue with this, and that even if we win, they'll appeal and appeal again. You will never see these paintings in your lifetime. And she said yes, right? So they signed an arbitration agreement that was going to be the decision. And it went to arbitration in Austria. You see this in the film. And the Austrian arbitrators agreed, right, that under Austrian law, okay, these paintings belong, okay, not to Austria, but to the heirs, okay, of the Black Powers, right? And to their credit, they honored the agreement. They could have said, oh, no, we changed our mind, okay? We're going to keep it. But they did. They went ahead and actually packed the paintings. There were a total of 5, right? Shipped them over. They wouldn't ship them to Maria Altman's house. That's not a place to be. So they were shipped to the LA County Art Museum. And in fact, they had a special exhibition for that I remember going and seeing during that time. And it was there. Now, Maria's not going to keep it there. So she put up the paintings, she and the other heirs, for auction. And Adele Bloch-Bauer I, the woman in gold, was sold for $135 million, which was, at that time, the highest amount ever paid for any work of art. You know, the art market is always, it's a good investment, by the way, you can tell. Buy art because the prices keep going up, right? People keep paying more. And it was bought by an art collector, Ronald Lauder, who's Jewish, who is the heir to the Estee Lauder empire, and he's been collecting Austrian German art for many, many years, right? And there's a gallery in New York called the Neue Gallery, and I happened to visit it just a couple of days ago. You feel like you're in interwar Vienna. You know, they have the strudel and the Napoleon, you know, and they've got people dressed like, and that's so you really feel like you're there. And then you go and you see that painting, that it's there, right? And he ended up buying for her. The other pieces were also sold, and it ended. But it didn't end there, it ended with the movie. Do you see that? So a film was made, The Woman in Gold, and I love this poster. I always mention this when I discuss. Look at this poster. So you've got Helen Mirren, Ryan Reynolds, you know, you have Daniel Bruhl, who plays the journalist who discovers the Heil Hitler letter. And it says, you see here the image, that the lawyer is taking Maria, okay, and he's leading her from darkness, from the swastika, right, into light. This is Jennifer, right? We teach our students, whether at Harvard Law School or Pepperdine or Chapman, this is what you're supposed to do. This is the inspiration for the lawyers. You can see I'm trying to say for Agla to do the same thing, okay? And so you end up having this result, but then after that, things just kind of went sideways. There was another case against Germany by another set of heirs. They also wanted to return a property that was looted by Hermann Göring. It went to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, facts are different. Right? And because their facts are different, you don't recover. So that was lost. There was a lawsuit against Hungary in 2024 by another heir that also, okay, was not successful. There was a lawsuit against the Metropolitan Museum in 2019, also was not successful. And you can see the reason, statute of limitations. You waited too long. Laches, you were aware of this. This one is interesting because it's the only one that made it a story in People magazine. Elizabeth Taylor, okay, had a Van Gogh, right, that her father purchased in London in the 1950s that was looted from a Jewish family, right? And the heirs were in Canada, the Orkin family. They went ahead and they tried to get it back, and they were unable to, because according to the Ninth Circuit, no, when that auction was in London, you should have been aware, because it was a public auction, that it was there and you should have made the claim there. And so you're not going to be able to succeed. So you see the technical procedural reasons, how this litigation can lead. And in fact, after she won the case, you see, this is in People magazine, she says, this affirms my great belief in the American judicial process. Of course, she won, right? And I am very grateful. Okay, and it's wonderful to have Vincent van Gogh back in my living room, and it stayed back in her living room until she died and went back to heirs. It never went back to the family. There's another museum in California, the Norton Simon Museum. They also had these two paintings, Adam and Eve. And in that case, the Ninth Circuit also said there's another procedural device called the active state doctrine, right? And if you were in law school, I would teach you about this. And you also don't get the painting back. There were also other cases, other reasons, burden of proof. There was a lawsuit you see of Boston MFA, superior interest by the museum. These are just various doctrines that basically say no. Now, as this is going on, I end up getting a call. And I get a call, and this is where we go into the case of Agla, okay, from this man, right, Vartke Segayan, who was born in Ethiopia, right? Parents were survivors of the Armenian genocide, and who says, I want to follow the model. Now, I don't want to follow the model with regard to art. I want to follow the model of the insurance lawsuits, okay? Because I read, okay, in Ambassador Morgenthau's diaries, okay, that the perpetrator came and said, you know, those Armenians, they're all dead. And they're all dead. So now these policies, New York Life that you had, it belongs to us. Yeah? And Ambassador Morgenthau just threw them out. Vargas reads this, and from the eye of a lawyer says, aha! Okay? And that's when he contacts me and he says, can you help me? Right? And so we started working on this. I put together a team. I have to mention another person who's a dear friend of mine, Lee Boyd, okay, who's a Harvard Law School graduate, also taught at Pepperdine, and became part of our litigation team with Vargas in order to go and do that. The insurance claims were settled. New York Life, to its benefit, to its credit, said, okay, we're not going to go through litigation. We're going to go ahead and have some kind of a restitution. And they ended up creating a fund by which, you know, monies were paid. Vargas continued with this work. He also, even though he was a full-time lawyer, was writing these various books. You see, I'm pointing some. And unfortunately, you know, he died. He died a number of years ago. And it was just so wonderful to be driving to Glendale, meeting him at his famous, you know, his favorite Armenian restaurant. He would bring on the special Ethiopian spices to add more flavor to it. And then we would talk about these cases. And he says, Michael, you know, there is these 5 pages torn from an Armenian Bible that are in the Getty Center, right? I think we should follow the Nazi literate art, right? And would you go with me to a meeting that we're going to have with the Getty, and we're going to talk to them about it? And we did. And they said, yes, we have these manuscripts, pages, okay, art. They call those Zaytun Gospels. They came from the Bible, right? The Bible is in the Marataran, but we have it here. So what? It belongs to us. The Armenians knew all this time that we had them. In fact, before we bought them, there were Armenian researchers who were writing about this and talking about it. So we have no choice. We have to file a lawsuit. So we now recognize Agla, Armenian art and other cultural objects that are looted, destroyed, or transferred in connection with the Armenian genocide. And we go to court. And this is interesting. As we go to court, Vargas says, okay, we need to have the right audience in the courthouse, in a courtroom. So he actually rents a bus. And we have all these elderly Armenians, men and women, okay, come to court, okay, as the judge is sitting there, and Lee Boyd, okay, goes, and she like, I'm going to ask this, this art does not belong to the Getty. It is the patrimony, imagine you, okay, of the Armenian people. And all the, you know, the Armenians, and the judge did not dismiss the lawsuit, okay? At that point, we had the HERE Act, which is the Holocaust Expropriation Art Recovery Act. And people thought that that act was unconstitutional, but it was found to be constitutional. So at that point in our situation, the Getty Center said, okay, we're going to go ahead and look at it more carefully. Let's try to settle it. So we did. We filed a lawsuit in 2010. These were 8 illustrated pages written from the 13th century Zaytun Gospels that were in a church that was looted to the Armenian genocide. It went from hand to hand to hand. It ended up with this family in Watertown in Massachusetts, the Atamian family, who just happened to have it. And the J.P. Morgan Library had an exhibition called Treasures from Heaven. And the Atamians lent those Zaytun Gospels. When the Gettys saw that, they said, I think we want to add this to our collection. And so they ended up buying those 5 pages, right? And the lawsuit occurs. In 2015, we achieved what I call our Solomonic settlement, okay? And the settlement was this. You, the Getty, will agree that these 5 pages, which are very rare, you can only take them out for like a half hour. Otherwise, any light will make a difference. I was able to see it once for 5 minutes, and then they showed it and they put it somewhere away. That recognizes that it is the Armenian church that is the owner, possessor of these Zaytun Gospels. Why? Because under American law, a thief can never transfer good title. It doesn't matter whether you didn't know that this was stolen. It doesn't matter. You don't have good title to it. Do you understand? And so we ended up having a ceremony, a settlement ceremony, where they took symbolically the Gospels. They gave it to the Western prelacy, the representative, okay? And the Western prelacy, oh, we need to preserve this. Let it stay in this collection, okay? So it's there. And that's where it remained. Do you see that? And so that was our settlement. We could have gone to trial, but again, there was a risk, right? You saw from those cases. So I think this was the best solution. And just like any solution, we had some people that were said, fine. There were some people in the Armenian diaspora community in Los Angeles who were not very happy with us. No, 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 you should go. Finish the case like the Othman case, get those pages, bring them back to the Marataran or put them somewhere else. But this was the settlement. But then we realized that this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's much more stuff because we were doing research there. And then our fates came together, okay? Because my dear friend, okay, is now at UCLA. He already told you that part of the story about the recognition of the Armenian genocide. So, and there was a book written about the Zaytun Gospels by Hegnar Wattenpau, who's an art historian, teaches at UC Davis, telling the whole story of what happened, including the last chapter was in litigation. So there's Hegnar, and there's the missing pages. I see it. You see my little torn thing to show that? And you actually can look at the Zaytun Gospels, and you can tell. And when Lee Boyd went to Yerevan to the Marataran, she actually opened, they showed her the Bible, and you could tell, okay, where those pages were torn, okay? So it was really clear, right? So we ended up saying, all right, now we have recognition of the Armenian genocide. What do we do next? And this is the brilliance of Taner Akçam. Let's do a conference, and we call it What Next? You see that? Armenian genocide restitution in the post-restitution, post-recognition era. Now, we're going to have a conference on this. What is the model? The model of Nazi-looted art. Who is our patron for Nazi-looted art? Ambassador Eisenstadt. We reach out to him and say, would you be our keynote speaker? Right? And tell us. And he said, yes. He did that. And so we ended up having a documentary made on this. We ended up having a second conference that examines the role of cultural heritage. And in between the two conferences, we went out, as Taner had mentioned, and brought in over the summer law students, art students, Armenian, non-Armenians, and we divided the United States into regions and say, Northeast region, you're responsible. Find all the Armenian art. Let's make a catalog of this, like a central registry. And then we'll look at art historians who will tell us any of this could be looted during the Armenian genocide, just like those web pages. And at the second conference, it was great because we had our students there as participants telling what they did, and we had to train them because we learned that it doesn't have to say Armenian. Sometimes it says Turkish or Byzantine or something else. So there's codes for this. You have to go ahead and take a look at it. And then Ambassador Eisenstadt ends up providing the legal framework. Now, I don't know, Mark, I wanted to play the short video, but we have to be connected to the internet. Is that possible? If not, I can tell about it, but if you...
I don't see that it is possible.
Okay, all right. So what Ambassador Eisenstadt said at the conference, that NLA provides, you see those words, a legal framework, okay, for Agla restitution. And he was the inspiration to us, saying, look, this is looted art. If it's looted art, it needs to be given back. At the same time, our timing was also great because there was now a cover story in National Geographic about colonial art, right? That's being restituted. So we saw like, oh, Agla comes kind of like in between colonial art that the Europeans, took from Africa, Asia, and Nazi looted art. And there's something that we can go and do this. And we have our patron saint, right, Ambassador Eisenstadt, who gave us the blessing to go ahead and do that. And that's how the project began. And that's what we're looking at. And that's what we're doing. So we are doing, it's an ongoing project. Do you see this? We created in UCLA under the Armenian Genocide Research Program, okay, that we have this research project, Agla RP, right? And we have students and historians that help us to identify looted art. And that's what we're doing this right now. As Tanner already mentioned, we already have some from that registry, our own registry, some pieces that we strongly suspect, right, are looted. We need to do more research, more provenance. We hired the historian who does the provenance for Nazi looted art, and we want to be sure. And we're not going to go, once we know that we're going to go and file a lawsuit, we're going to approach the museum and we're going to say, look, let's have a fair and just resolution. What that fair and just resolution will be, I don't know. But it becomes, and I'll use the same term for Holocaust restitution, a measure of justice. Let me give you a postscript to this. And that is, I was in New York on Saturday. I am walking by Central Park and I see the Newa Gallery, right? Like, oh, I have to go in and see it. I go in there, I go on the second floor, and there's the guide showing and talking about the woman in gold. This is the original. Do you see that? And she tells the story as to what happened. And next to this, okay, there is a, let me see if I can find this. There you go. The fate of the woman in gold. Do you see that? So people who go see it, they're just not looking at the art object. They see a history of the Jewish people and what happened in Austria. And it's there, okay? And we ended up, this is, by the way, Gustav Klimt, who painted it, okay? He apparently always worked in a smock and he didn't wear anything underneath the smock. At least that's the story goes. And we went downstairs because I couldn't take a picture with the tour guide, but we took it for the reproduction. So here we are, okay? I hope that someday, sometime soon, we can do the same thing with Agla, and we shall see where it goes. Dear friends, it's really something new. As you can see, we're excited about this. And something that Taner Akçam mentioned in the other talks, and I want to bring it out now. It's very interesting. Okay, I'm not Armenian, I'm Jewish. Okay, he's Turkish, right? Professor Lon Fiedler is from University of Texas Law School, right? And we are all passionate about this, right? And we have students that are both Armenians and non-Armenians. So it's the new generation. Do you see that? And they see that going beyond, as Dr. Akram mentioned, beyond recognition, do something really valuable. Now, let me end with the following. You see this? This was a bust that was in the Denver Museum of Art that a couple months ago was returned to Turkey. Okay? So, if Turkey wants its art back that was looted, I'll let you finish the sentence. Thank you. Actually, you can come on. Put it over there. Anna?
I'll get that. Go up and
Yeah.
sit.
I think this is a good part of the background, right? It's inspiration.
Just in case. Okay, so for Q&A, as you've heard me say in the past and will hear me say in the future, for those of you in the room, please come up to the microphone here in the middle. It's very low. It's not because I think everybody shorter than me is tiny. It's because I want you to pick up the microphone and speak into it. And for those online, you can use the Zoom Q&A. And let me mention now, while I'm also collecting my thoughts, that following the Q&A, there will be a reception. There are food out there, and there are also books on sale, including Neither to Laugh Nor to Weep. And usually at this point, I like to start the Q&A, but I want to try something, and I'm going to take a chance that maybe he'll allow it to happen. Some of you were here last week. We had a program that in many ways dovetails with the topic of tonight on genocide reparations from a different perspective. And one of the speakers was our friend and board member, Henry Theriault. And I wanted to ask Henry if he would be willing to open the Q&A, because I think what was discussed last week comes at this from a different angle, but one that maybe is illuminating. Can I presume upon you?
Could I ask to let other people speak first? I would like to make some comments, but I don't think I should be the first person to speak.
Oh, humor me.
I really don't think I should be the first.
Okay, then maybe you'll be the last. Who will be the first? Sir, please, come on up.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for such a insightful presentation. I have two questions. One is the research program, is it limited to art pieces located physically in the United States or throughout the world? And Dr. Akça, my question would be, you mentioned something that an institutionalized organization that should own the process of justice and that doesn't exist currently. How you envision that organization to be comprised of Armenian institutions, organizations, and individuals, maybe? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll answer the first one, which is we're starting with the United States, right? We know, all of us know that there's Armenian art objects in museums all over the United States, all over the world, including the British Museum and other places. It could be in private collections. We just don't know. So this is the first step. And I think it's important as a first step, just like we did with the Getty case, to start a precedent. And if we go ahead and have a fair and just resolution with another, let's say, museum in the United States. It'll be easier to go to name a museum in Europe and say, look what this museum did in the United States, or these two museums did. You should be doing the same. What that same is, I don't know. I think every single case has its own facts, and we can't predict what would be the fair and just solution.
To add all this, I mean, as you know, the term genocide.
Microphone, please.
I'm sorry?
That thing in
Yeah,
your
the
hand.
term genocide was invented by Raphael Lemkin, especially for the aspect of culture and civilization. This was too important term for him because he believed the nation creates civilization and culture, and genocide destroys the culture and civilization. So you should really envision this entire initiative, Bluetooth Art Project, as to take back what is destroyed. The reminiscence in Turkey, that it should be labeled, it should be known. This was the culture of Armenians in Anatolia, in Western Armenia. This should be taken back. So not look to the government, whether it recognizes or not, regardless, that we can start a process to take it back what is lost, and we know, and we can take it back. This is the really very important aspect in genocide studies. How I envision the organization, I mean, it's very simple. Armenian organization, there are enough out there, they should come get together. This is like 1951 when the negotiations started between Germany and Israel, and diaspora organization came together and established a claim commission. And my recommendation to all Armenian organizations, this is in Washington and others, they can come together. They can still continue their own agenda, their fights, their conflict with each other. It's normal. I mean, Jews also, they love fighting with each other. This is a culture in several ethnic groups. I mean, when I met Vahakan Dadrian first time, 1999, 1993, or in Hamburg. The first lecture he gave to me was the following. He said, Taner, do you know the basic difference between Armenians and the Turks? In emergency case, you Turks, you leave everything aside and you unite. And we Armenian, even in our worst situation, we love fighting with each other. We don't like to unite ourselves. So, of course, this is the anecdote I remember, but the important thing is Armenian organizations can come together and develop a roadmap for themselves. And 2016 HERE Act is one of the really achievable goal very easily. Important thing is these organizations should come together and develop a roadmap, and they should, of course, work with the art historian and with the academia together. Second important form of organization that I learned from our experience is that it should be institutionalized within academic setting also. We need young research assistant, full-time employed and working on that subject, and make this an important academic endeavor. We have couple very important, valuable art historians, Hegnar Wattenpaug and Christina Maranshi. They are really swam up to here. And you cannot expect from individual scholars to complete all these issues. It is important you institutionalize these with young research assistants. But for all this to happen, we should really start to think a little bit differently. This is a very simple track. It should make something tick here in our brain. Instead of we are waiting for Turkey the recognition, we should start really where are the cultural objects, how can we go after them, and how can we get them back and label, at least make that known that it's a part of Armenian civilization and Armenian culture. This is the way to go. And if we go this way, I think we can really do a lot of things in Turkey too. This is the other aspect. Maybe we can talk later. Yeah.
Question from online viewer. Thank you for providing this lecture via Zoom. You're welcome. How can art history scholars and professionals interested in providing their volunteer services get involved in the project? Is there a contact point for the working group?
Yes, there is contact for the working group. They should go to UCLA, Armenian Genocide Research, Looted Art Research Project. There is an email address and they can write us, and we are trying to keep in contact with every applicant and trying to find jobs for them also.
Oh my God, look at all those hands. I think Judy was the next person.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akçam and Professor Bazilar, for this wonderfully edifying presentation. And it's very nice to see you, Dr. Akçam. I wanted to ask, has the Turkish government sued American museums for art that is actually Armenian art? And if so, what has been the result of that? You know, what have they gone to museums and claimed that the Armenian art actually is Turkish art or belongs to Turkey? And what is the result of that?
Let me say this, as I understand your question. I'm not aware, Mark, maybe you know, of Turkey trying to reclaim an Armenian art object in the United States that Turkey says what belongs to us. Speaking as a lawyer, okay, I could see, you know, the Republic of Turkey today could say, we are the direct successor of the Ottoman Empire, right? And therefore, we now make the claim for this. As far as I know, they have not done this. I mean, this particular piece I showed, this came from the Greco-Roman era, that part of the world, the Byzantine Empire, and those are the ones that claimed. I do know of one case, and this was presented to us at the conference, of a sword that was made by an Armenian artisan. And it said that it was a Turkish sword, right? And the attorneys ended up going to the museum and saying, please change the designation. It's not a Turkish sword. It didn't require litigation. So, and this claim against the Denver Museum, there was no lawsuit. There was a claim presented, and the museum agreed, and they ended up restituting them.
I can add something to that. There is a memorandum of understanding between United States and Turkey. If there is an art object taken out of Turkey without permission of Turkish government, according to this memorandum of understanding, it should go back to Turkey. And theoretically, Turkish government can claim for any art object that belonged to Ottoman Empire. And Armenian Bar Association, and we also write letters in that direction, that this memorandum of understanding should be put a really footnote, or how do you call it, a thing there that it should be proved whether it is looted art or not. So there is an issue going on that topic, and it's a very important issue. Yeah.
Ed. No one's leaving until everyone's question gets answered. Okay. Don't worry.
Thank you. My name is Ed Kasanjan. I've had the pleasure of visiting my grandfather's villages in Eastern Turkey, and I can't imagine them owning a Klimt or a Van Gogh with sitting where they lived. But how would this apply to physical property? buildings or contents of buildings that were there in the time of the genocide that are still there if you wanted to reclaim those.
Yeah, I'll answer that, and I'll go back to Varkas. After there was a settlement with the insurance companies, we actually look at land in, do you know about the Incirlik base in Turkey, in the area called Adana? And Varkas showed to us, if you look at that land, it's actually belonged to Armenians, right? And we could take the map and superimpose. And so we thought that we could get jurisdiction here in the United States. We were unsuccessful. I said, you cannot make this claim. It was a difficult claim. We tried. So litigation did not work in that situation. As to personal property, okay, that's much, I think there's a possible claim. So if somebody from Turkey, right, comes to the United States and brings an Armenian art jewelry as an example, okay, and that jewelry we recognize was made by Armenian artisans, because the item is here in the United States courts have in rem jurisdiction because the object is here and can decide who's the proper claimant. And so that makes it a lot easier. It has to be physically located within the United States, okay, if you have that. So, physical property is movable, right? Real property, immobiliaria, is not. It stays there. And that becomes much more difficult.
I mean, I know the Turkish legal structure a little bit. I wrote a book on it. Aram translated that book. It's Spirit of the Law, the confiscated of Armenian properties. It's a very legal, complicated legal process. But the short answer to that question, if an Armenian remained in Turkey after 1924 August, this is the beginning of the Lausanne Agreement as a and the power, then theoretically you might have a right to claim. If it's before 1924, if the family or individual left Turkey before 1924 August, it is almost impossible. And we have to make a distinction between collective properties like the churches, monasteries, palaces, and so on, and the individual properties. And Turkish government, of course, will never allow a court give the property back during genocide, because it will create a precedent and then hell broke laws. This is almost impossible. But what can be done is really recognizing, labeling, and making them known for these kind of art objects, the bridges, the churches, or other important, really Armenian architecture, to label them in a way that it shows that it belongs to Armenian culture. It can be done, and there can be really important dynamic in Turkey towards that direction. Michael's example is very important. Turkey is after these properties and art objects, saying that it belongs to me. And we all have been going in that process, whether or not 1915 a genocide or not, and fighting people on that terminology. You can have this fight, but you cannot fight if there is a church there and you can say this is an Armenian church and we have to put a label on it, that this is Armenian church built at that time, and so on and so forth. There is no argument against it. They can have an argument in the genocide case, but not related to that building, because it's very obvious it belonged to Armenian culture, Armenian civilization.
You may be underestimating them, but we'll see. I want to ask a question from online. It's a long question, which I'm not going to ask in its entirety, but it's a serious person, and I want to ask this part of it because I think it actually is based on a misperception of the project, but I want to give you the opportunity to answer this. Armenia and Armenians gain political advantage by having Armenian objects, proving Armenia's importance on public display in the world's major museums. To actually boast about creating a hit list of Armenian objects to be appropriated from American collections is more than an attack on history, on the concept of museum collections, and on academic research. It is an attack on Armenia. I realize that's not a question, but I want you to clarify what the project is and what the project is not vis-a-vis this question.
So
or
you are
comment.
the committee member, make this clarification.
I don't believe, well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No,
please.
I want the experts to take this on. Are we going to be running into museums and taking items out of the museums and appropriating them?
We are in a process. For me, the most important issue to open a conversation on that topic. During that process, what I learned, maybe this goes back to other question also. You know, there are art objects you cannot really identify easily whether it's Armenian or not, because sometimes it's called Byzantine art object, or Seljuks, or Ottomans. So it is another really topic of research to really try to find out whether this art object in Seljuk period belonged to an Armenian artist or to Armenians. And this is another very tricky, important part that we want to clarify. Related to the where it should go question, it is very difficult and there is no one single answer to that. For each, we will discuss and we will talk when we discovered each object. For me, the important part is the conversation. That to have a debate, to have a discussion, really where should this object go? It can go to Mediterranean, to Armenia. Or now we have in California, a new museum. It might go to that museum. It can stay in the museum it has been discovered. So these are different possibilities that should be discussed. The most important criteria for me, Elizabeth Taylor is a best example, it should not stay in a private home. It should be accessible to community. It should be accessible to everyone, and it should be protected. Mediterranean is a perfect place. If it's difficult, Armenian Genocide, Armenian Museum in California is a perfect place, or some place else. This should go to community, and community should decide through their representatives through a discussion process. And one of the best ways to find an agreement with the museum, for example, as Michael showed in the Woman in Gold, that there is a story of it, that we have a story in the museum that we find these objects. These are some thoughts that we can talk.
I want to mention at the end of the movie, A Woman in Gold, and this actually happened, the Austrian government representative talks to Maria, says, "You're taking these objects away from Austria." She said, "I never wanted to do that." Okay? If they just recognized that, and they would put that explanation that now is the new gallery, she would have been satisfied with that, right? But they didn't. Do you see that? So we're not in the job of going in either ourselves or to deputize other people to start taking objects away from museums. We just want first recognition, and the recognition that happened in the Getty case. You'll see the provenance. They changed the provenance. We want to have even a larger description, for each one of these objects, so that when someone sees an Armenian art object and it is looted, there's a story, and because a story, it's an education moment. a story for the person at the museum. Ah, this is how it got to this museum, all right? And what happened? And the fact that it was looted during the Armenian genocide is a very important part of that story that should be there.
Thank you. Linda.
This was a great presentation. I thank you very much. I want to ask about the goddess Anahit at the British Museum. I've been there many times and I've seen it as being presented as Asia Minor, Turkey, whatever. And recently it went into an exhibition, temporary exhibition into Armenia. Do we know the history, how that, you mentioned about colonialist times. Do we know how that ended up at the British Museum, number one? And number two, if we can have any claim, and just like you said, maybe not get it back, but at least have the right, labeling for it. And, I mean, and the fact that recently it went into Armenia, I mean, how would Turkey deny that that is, belongs to Turkey and not Armenia? The second question I want to ask is, I personally knew Vartkes Yeriayan, and I know the cases he was working on. Is there anybody else who has kind of like continuing his work? I mean, for the community, it was a great loss, and I'm just wondering if there is any such lawyer who is presently pursuing those type of cases.
Thank you.
I think that I and Jennifer are training the new generation of Vartkes Yegayans to seek justice. So that's where my hope is, that the new generation will go continue this, because these objects are looted. They all always have that stain of being looted. Right? And so that stain will never go away. And it's up to attorneys to go ahead and to make that claim, to make that presentation, to do it, as the term Dr. Acha mentioned, for a measure of justice, fair and just solution.
Maybe for the court cases Michael mentioned, there is a United States Supreme Court decision 2021. There is a court decision Michael mentioned about it. It's 2021. They add a new clause and it makes almost impossible lawsuits here in American law system, as far as I understand from Michael. If a government confiscated the property of its own citizens, it is not a subject of international law, so it cannot be represented here in American court. This is the new decision, so it makes the issue more complicated, but of course, legal fight will continue. To your first question, I wish we had an art historian here. It's not my area of expertise, so I cannot answer. I don't know whether you can answer, Michael.
Actually, the provenance is known. I think it was found something like in 1891 or something, but I'm not an art historian, but the Anahit statue, number one, we don't actually know 100% that it's even Armenian, but it was found in like Erzincan area in the 19th century, and it was sold by an art dealer. So Armenians can claim it because some people think it refers to the goddess Anahit, but other people think that it may have been made by Greek or Roman artisans. So it's one of those things that's kind of open to dispute. If Turkey can claim Greco-Roman ruins or artworks and get them back from Europe and the United States, it could very well claim, whether this is Armenia or not, it could claim almost anything that was found on its soil. So it would be a hard fight. But, the thought crossed my mind that this is something that's not new. It just hasn't been done in a concerted manner, because from the very beginning after the genocide, there have been either individual and some even organizational efforts to get this kind of property, and they went through phases. And it's right now, what you're talking about in a way is more of an academic endeavor. In other words, it's something that you need scholars to do. It's not, and you need, of course, the law, the force of the law also to argue it, but it's more like to promote Armenology in the United States. It seems to be, I'll give you one example. Manya Ghazarian, who, I don't know if you Mark, was a scholar from Armenia. She was a specialist in Armenian carpets, and she came to the United States. She wrote a book probably in the end of the Soviet era. And I happened to be in New York at the time, and I went with her to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And we went to the rug section, and she saw many rugs which she believed not only were mislabeled, but, you know, were, according to her at least, certainly of Armenian provenance. We complained about some of those things, and same thing with description of Urartu, Asia Minor, Turkey. There's like a whole, for about 20 years, a battle over that. So I'm just pointing out that this is something that individual scholars have done. It's great to have it in a concerted fashion, but there are also other issues which are, you know, of a different nature, which also warrant putting our energy and time as a community for restitution. and reparation.
In that vein, I wanted to
Yes, Prime.
ask Henry. Go back to Henry.
So sorry to beg your indulgence for a moment, but I'm gonna, if I can have a moment, I want to tell you a funny story about Randy Schoenberg. That's really an insult to me. By the way, if you want to understand Randy's personality, at least as an undergrad, it's not Ryan Reynolds in Women in Gold. It's Ryan Reynolds in Deadpool. He's very sardonic. He's a great guy. He's a brilliant guy. And we were friends mainly because we both struggled through math courses at Princeton many decades ago, speaking of our alma mater. And I have to tell you, to get an understanding of Randy's wit, at the end of our sophomore year, we all had to decide what we're going to finally major in. And I said, you know what, Randy, I don't think I'm going to major in math. I just don't quite have the level. And he looked at me, and Randy had always been sort of, you know, make fun of me and stuff like that for years, or for 2 years. And he looked at me and he said, wow, I'm so sorry to hear that. And for the first moment, I was like, wow, Randy's being really sympathetic. And then he said, yeah, because now I'm going to be the worst math major. So that's the kind of wit. So, but I want to be a little more serious about this. I do appreciate the context. That is his, I mean, yeah. And I can tell you, friends of mine visited him when he had the Woman in Gold in his home. I don't know if you know, the owner let him keep it for like a while, and all sorts of funny stuff like that. But I want to be a little bit more serious, and express some thoughts, and particularly in the context of having been friends with Taner for many years, I would say many years, and with Michael, not as close, but we've certainly known each other and have respected your work tremendously. And the one of the questions I think we need to ask, I think this is a great project. I come from a family of artists, art historians, and so forth. Art for me is central to life. It's the antidote to genocide, if I really have to say, creative expression. And I think of thinking in the Holocaust of Rothko and people like that, Gorky in the Armenian case, and so many other artists. But one of my questions is, yes, I think we should be doing this kind of thing, but given the fact that of the extant Armenian cultural heritage right now, and that is already after the destruction of Nakhchivan, much of the destruction that already happened in Turkey and so forth. One of the things I think about the artwork that you're talking about is at least it's safe, because it's valued wherever it is. It might not be labeled properly, but it's valued. And is the crisis moment right here preserving the artwork particularly in Azerbaijan, and in Artsakh and so forth, that is being destroyed? And I'm not sure, I don't think you would disagree necessarily, but I would ask that. The second thing is, I'm going to ask Taner, and again, we sometimes disagree. I would ask you, and I'd be happy to talk to you about this, but to think a little bit about the sort of explanation of reparations in the Armenian community that you gave. It wasn't accurate, and I have to be very clear about this. I started writing and speaking about reparations in 2003. I spent 4 years of my career on denial, decided denial recognition was not the issue. 2 years after that, I worked with Dennis Brutus, who was, among other things, jailed in South Africa multiple times, shot by the Afrikaner police, and was the person who got South Africa kicked out of the Olympics originally in 1960. He was at my university, and we worked together in 2005 to convene a global reparations conference. And what we called it was the beginning of a global movement for reparations. And Armenians were in that, Native Americans, African Americans, South Africans, and a number of other groups, Comfort Women, whom I know you've worked with. And I could go into other things. 2012, the second convened a major conference in Antilles with more than 25 major international lawyers on reparations and so forth. And so I'm trying to put a corrective there. Reparations has been a discussion in the Armenian community for a long time. Not everybody shares that view. I think some people do have the view of recognition, but not reparations. But I think what you're doing, you would be better served by contextualizing that within this bigger movement, because I think there's a lot of support for reparations and there's been a lot of groundwork laid. So I would suggest that. And then I would also maybe caution a little bit. I get the jokes about Armenians and so forth, but I'm also thinking about the work I do with Native Americans, with African Americans, with other groups, transgender and so forth, around human rights issues. And I try to be very careful about where my line is. I understand you're advising us, and that's fine. But I want to maybe caution a little bit about allowing the process within Armenian communities to come up with what is the agenda, what is it that people need for justice, and to have that conversation rather than having a great idea and then saying, hey, let's go for this, if I can suggest that. I'll stop there. I know we again, sometimes disagree, respect and love you, as you know, but I do think it's good that we have this discussion, because I'm hoping that what you're doing, what other people are doing, is really going to make a difference. And ultimately, and I'll say this, I said this, was it Thursday? Jermaine said this, and others. Reparations for Armenians is really an existential issue at this point. I don't see Armenia having a great future. And so I think what you're suggesting is something that can be very important in a kind of recognition of the need to preserve Armenians somehow within a context that won't happen in other directions, because I think the art exposure is really important, but maybe to think about contextualizing it that way. And I'll stop there. I appreciate your indulgence. And just remember, I tried to start funny with Randy.
Noted.
Yeah.
Thanks, Henry. Connor, would you like to?
Oh yeah, it's of course, conversation has started. So we should really start. This is 2021, the recognition of Armenian genocide by president. And I know all these individual attempts. I mean, we organized a conference at Clark. I was in the advisory board for the Antilles Catholicosate for the lawsuit. I know all this. It is not on the community's agenda in general. I know you were, for example, in a committee, you also produced something. Our late friend Edwin Minassian was working also in these issues, and so on and so forth. I'm aware of all these development. So we should really, it is almost 6 years since 2021, and it is not on the general agenda of Armenian diaspora. This is what I'm saying. And it should be. And our project is one part of it. Other initiatives are also part of it. We should really start the conversation on that topic, how we should develop and make reparation as a central issue within the Armenian diaspora activism. This is what I'm saying, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. Michael, last words?
Well, Henry, first, it's great to see you. We have not seen each other for many years. Yeah. this is very particular. Okay, you're taking a much larger issue, which I think needs to be done. But we are focusing on one thing. And that's, I rather focus on that and achieve something. And I do hope that you are successful. I mean, Tanner and I had mentioned this. At some point, we hope to see, probably not in our lifetime, just like there's a memorial to the murdered Jews in central, Berlin. There's a memorial to the murdered Armenians, in Ankara or Istanbul, right? I think Turkey will be a better nation. And Germany and the Germans, prime ministers have been telling Turkey for years, because we recognize what we did, we're actually stronger as a result of it. So I think all of us are doing the good part.
Absolutely. I want to stress again that I think what you're doing has very significant symbolic, and I don't mean that in a dismissive way, because I think the symbolism is crucial for ethical transformation, both in Turkey and outside, has incredible importance in a way that other approaches to education and so forth won't have. So I didn't mean to suggest that's not important. Just thinking about how to contextualize it within this bigger framework. But I do admire the work, and as I said, I mean, that from even the early work on the Holocaust that you've done, I think is really important.
So we have crossed the 2-hour mark, and I think we should probably stop there. I know there were additional hands, and I truly apologize, but our speakers are not going to flee from the building. We will go out and we will continue to talk out there. I want to conclude by thanking again Tanner and Michael so much for your presentations, the audience online and in person for your patience and attention, and especially the Hartunian family for your support for this event. I hope Pastor Vartan would be proud and pleased, and we will do it again in the future, and we'll have some conversations about what that will look like. So thank you so much. Enjoy the reception.